Top 51 games of all time, number 30 to number 21. Now with me having the greater ability to actually count, come on back after the break. Hey everybody, welcome out to the show Board Game Reviews. This is a YouTube channel based on the tabletop gaming hobby, and on this video series, we're taking a look at my top 51 games of all time. In this video, we're going to cover number 30 all the way down to number 21, but that's enough about the chitter chatter. Let's go in and get things started with number 30. Number 30, and moving from number 29, which is barely any movement at all, especially when it comes to this list, is going to be the Game of Fantastica. A game that's fantastically, part of the pun, been on my list for ever since the beginning of my list, because this is quite absolutely a fantastic deck building game. Wonder how many times I get away with that pun. Probably twice, so I'm not going to use it anymore. Hopefully. But the Game of Fantastica, this is basically a deck building game with a wonderful amount of whimsy, a wonderful amount of charm, and a wonderful amount of interesting gameplay mechanics that allows you to take what used to be a very dry mechanic, Dominion, and turns it into a game that actually has a lot of whimsy, a lot of charm, a lot of childhood wonder, and brings in all that amount of great enjoyment to bring this deck building game that has so much more than just the basic grand deck building game mechanics that this game has actually originated from. Now, the Game of Fantastica is an older game now. It was actually probably one of the, I call this a second gen deck building games, whereas Dominion was more of a first gen deck building game, which launched the entire genre of board games, or those style board games. But this is basically a second gen of that style game, taking those mechanics, and what it's done is, like I said, has made it such an amount of whimsy while adding in a whole bunch more to the basic gameplay, which makes it so much greater than the sum of its parts. Because this is a deck building game where the players are each going to start with a deck of cards, and every player has their starting hand of cards, and make sure I learn how to count today, count exactly 5 cards. And this is your typical deck building game where you can use your hand of cards to go ahead and purchase more cards. By purchasing these cards, you're eventually going to be able to work towards getting the victory point cards, and getting enough of those victory point cards, you're going to win the game. We've seen that before in deck building games, but again, this game adds whimsy, charm, and theme on top of that very dry mechanic that Dominion got started. In this game, every single player is going to control a hero in this fantastical, see I said fantastical, I didn't use the joke again, in this fantastical land where we're exploring the whimsy of our childhood. You remember being a child where you play make-believe, where you all had your swords, you went out there, fought the dragon, and defeated the horrible evil creatures in the land dressed up as a knight. We all took our Halloween costumes and we played pretend as kids. This takes that theme and marries it with a very strong deck building mechanic. Because on your turn, you're simply going to look at your hand of cards, and you're going to use your hand of cards to go out there and defeat these various different villains. And when you defeat these villains, they get added into your hand, giving you more power, and you can use the power of these villains to go out there and complete these quests. Once you complete a certain amount of quests, there's going to be a winner of the game. And this game plays all the way from 2 to 4 players, and you can play this as a single player game where each player is just playing alone versus the other players. Or if you're playing a 4-player game, you actually play this game as a team game, which is actually a really fantastic way to play the game. Darn it, I did it again. That was not intentional. But in the team-based game, you're actually working together with a community between your partner and yourself. And the cool thing about playing with a game with a partner is you can share cards between each other to help each one of you complete all these wonderful quests. So on your turn, basically what you do is you're going to look at your hand of cards and you figure out which one of these wonderful enemies you can conquer by looking at your hand of cards. Because every one of your cards has a special ability that allows you to conquer certain things. So for example, in my hand of cards, I have a net, a helmet, a toothbrush, a candle, and a bat. And the net represents my net. My helmet represents my ability of my armor that I can use to go out there against these bad guys. My toothbrush is my magic wand. My candle is my fireball. And my bat is my sword, which allows me to defeat all these bad guys. So if I want to defeat the Enchantress, I can simply play my bat to defeat the Enchantress, move over here into the field where we see that I got an encounter a billy goat. Well, I can subdue the billy goat by throwing a net over it to go ahead and capture it and move over into these frozen wastelands. Now, unfortunately, I can't take out these spiders because I don't have anything to do so my turn is going to come to an end. And I'm simply going to claim these cards. They're going to go in my discard pile, and eventually these cards are going to all come back in my hand. Again, giving me extra special powers to help me complete these quests. Because completing these quests, again, are how you're going to gain victory points. So, for example, if I want to repair the tree swing by the tyrannical child Terrell, I just need to have 2 web cards. Well, I just got my first web card just by going out there. I'm sorry, I already have a web card, but what I managed to gain is I gained a Billy Goat card, and I gained an Enchantress, so if I have any quests that require the Billy Goat or the Dragon, I can complete those quests. But I'm going to try to complete these quests by going out there and exploring all these lands. After your turn is over, you're just going to simply refill all these space with further creatures or events that are going to eventually come out, because there's also events that happen to me in this deck, such as Ravenous Ravens, a Fairy Ring, which may change the way the game is going to play. There may be a Market Day, a Magic Carpet. All these different things are going to influence and change how this game plays. On top of that, you're going to see that we have these various different obelisks, which is kind of a wonderful little throwback to the book, The Never-Ending Story. Because remember the Never-Ending Story, we had to go out to these various different big locations to go ahead and explore them. Well, we basically got the same idea here, because we can go out to the Beast Bazaar, where we can find more beasts to help us travel these various different lands. We can go out to the Artifact Tower right here, where we can gain very powerful artifacts to help us on our quests. Or we can just simply go out to the Cup of Quests and gain more quests, because remember, we got to complete these quests to win the game. This game has got such a wonderful amount of whimsy and charm and so much wonderful gameplay, and there's so much variety in this game, especially when you start getting all the expansions, because they do you various different things, such as adding the castle in the air, more beasts, more quests, more different events that can pop up, and more different ways to play this game. Now, this game has a nice, wonderful, evolving gameplay to it, because as you start the game, you're going to have these very easier to subdue monsters, but as you start playing through the deck, the monsters are going to start getting much more powerful, such as powerful water nymphs, such as no longer fighting baby dragons, you're going to start fighting the big granddaddy dragons. Again, going through trying to defeat these much more powerful creatures, bringing whimsy, charm, and imagination to a wonderful deck building game. That's the Game of Fantastica number 30. Number 29, and moving down from number 8, is going to be Escape Plan from Vital Lacerda. Vital Lacerda is a designer who can make some of the most deepest, richest, most engrossing strategy games, and then add a theme on top of it, which is something that some Eurogame designers have trouble doing. That's not something Vital Lacerda has any problems doing, because he does this fantastically, and he's done it again very fantastically in the game of Escape Plan. Now, the game of Escape Plan is a game for 2 to 5 players. Now, there are some solo rules you can play with, which makes this a solo game if you want. But the basic idea of this game is this is every single heist movie, every single bank robbery movie, everything along those lines played in a board game. This is Ocean's 11, the board game. This is Reservoir Dogs, the board game. This is the scene after every single big heist where all the bad guys are sitting around the table, they're separating out their loot, and they figured out that the heat is onto them and they need to escape the city, and they only have a certain amount of time to do that. If they fail to escape from the city, they're going to be arrested by the FBI, the federal police, whatever it happens to be after them, they're going to be arrested and they're going to lose the game. So the objective of this game is to escape the city in a certain amount of days with the most amount of money. One little extra wrinkle onto the game, though, is that as the players escape, the heat rises and rises, making it to the point where you actually need to have money to escape the city. Why do you need money to escape from the city? Well, thematically, you're paying off all your allies, all your friends, let's use that term very loosely when it comes to the criminal underworld, but you're paying off all your friends to help you ensure that you manage to get to the exit and escape from the city on time. So this game plays out very quickly, very richly, and it is an extremely tight game when it comes to the gameplay mechanics, because like Lacerda's many of his games, all of his games are very, very tight resource engine, where you only have so many actions in the entire game, but you have, let's just say 10 actions, but you need like, oh, I don't know, like 1,000 actions just to do everything in these games, because they offer so much rich variety of choices, rich variety of gameplay, and a rich variety of different ways that you can access these games, bring these games to the table, and have different strategies every time you play this game. And like I said, he has a wonderful way to incorporate theme into his basic gameplay designs, and he's done that extremely well with this game. You have the basic idea that the players are basically going to start the game in the hospital, and then they need to explore the city. They may go to visit some of their lockboxes, unlock some of their lockboxes to go ahead and get some of their stash money. And I haven't mentioned this yet, but I'll cover this in just a second about the art. But you're going to go around the various different locations of the city. Maybe you're going to hire a couple motorcycle gangs. Maybe you're going to access some helicopters, but you're basically going to fly across the city, go into all your various different safe houses, using all your resources and the people, your underlings, working to gather all your various different funds and supplies. Then you want to escape the city with the most amount of money before the price to get out of the city gets too high, because that price to escape of the city is part of your victory points. You must pay that to escape. So you kind of have this ebb and flow of this game, where you constantly looking at going, I have a decent amount of money. If I'm the first to escape, I'm safe. I can win the game. I have a potential to win the game. But if I escape right now, my opponent across the table from me is going to get a couple more actions, and are those actions powerful enough to make enough money for the payment to escape and still escape with more money than me, meaning that I'm going to be the loser of the game and my opponent across the table is going to be the winner of the game. So this game has so many rich decisions, and again, like I said, like a lot of Lacerda's games, the decision space is so extremely tight because you only have so many actions in this game. And there's so many different decisions in the decision tree that go into playing this game. This is one of those games where you can be easily inundated with so many decisions that you're not going to know what to do, because he has a wonderful way to design games where you have a large decision tree, so many options and so many choices, but you need to pick a path, take that path and go down that path and work on that path to make it the best path for victory for your plan of attack when it comes to this game. Now, this game has a wonderful amount of visual appeal to it. You got to give 100 thumbs up to Ian O'Toole. Did a great job with this game. From the fact that your player shield looks like a little money bag, that's awesome. Your wallet here looks literally like a wallet. You have your back pocket where you're going to hide your various different things in your various different contexts. You have your little key ring and your awesome little key ring right here. These player boards are three-dimensional, which I know we live in a three-dimensional world, so it sounds stupid to say that, but there's actually cutouts for all your different pieces, making sure that your pieces are not going to slide around when you play this game. And you have this wonderful evolving map, which is going to change every time you play the game, because you're going to shuffle up all these tiles and the game's going to change every time you play with the landscape. The game's going to play differently every time you play the game. With the law enforcement is going to be coming out trying to get your players and trying to arrest them and take them to jail. And you're going to have lots of scenes that are going to feel reminiscent of some of the classic Hollywood movies, such as Reservoir Dogs, such as Ocean's 11, all those different scenes where you have the shootout where you're trying to run away, trying to escape, trying to use your gangs, your helicopters, and all your different contacts to escape the city with the most amount of money. That is the game of Escape Plan. Number 28, and jumping up from number 35, is going to be the game of Core Worlds from Andrew Parks. Now, Andrew Parks as a designer kind of reminds me of the kind of guy who's going to take a really good game and he's going to take the game and he's going to improve on it a heck of a lot. It's kind of like somebody runs up to him and says, Mr. Parks, there's this deck building game called Dominion. Oh, really? Here, hold my beer for a second. Or somebody runs up to him and says, Mr. Parks, there's this game called Maginate where you're going to work across this great land and conquer everything. You're going to play a deck building game and... Really? Here, hold my beer for a second. Hey, Mr. Parks, you won't believe this. There's this really cool thing called a worker placement game. You won't believe what is done with this kind of game of style. It's really, really awesome. Yeah, I can do better. A lot better. And that's the cool thing about games from Andrew Parks. He takes a really great game design or a great gameplay mechanic and he massages that gameplay mechanic, modifies that gameplay mechanic, and evolves it to create a game that is much better than what has come before. And that's what he's done with the game of Core Worlds. Core Worlds has taken the basic idea of a deck building game and improved on it on so many levels, especially when you start getting the expansions. And the basic idea of Core Worlds is every single player is going to take control of a fledgling empire in the far, far future in some galaxy that's unknown, it's irrelevant to the game. But basically the players are going to be taking care or taking control of some kind of small fledgling empire, working through the various different galaxies or solar systems, trying to work towards the grand core worlds to conquer those core worlds and become the new leader of this future galactic civilization. This game is a very interesting game because the very first thing it does that's so interesting for the game is it is actually an asymmetric game, because every single player is going to start with their own fledgling empire, and every one of these empires plays differently from every other empire in the game. Every one of these fledgling empires is going to come with their basic starting deck of cards, and this deck of cards is going to have a special card that's very unique to you, which is basically going to be your special hero. Now, it's not a super asymmetric game. It's not like this game is taken and broken down a whole bunch of barriers to create this super widely asymmetric game, but it's enough of a symmetry that you need in a deck building game that allows you to have a little bit of extra replay without having anything being overpowered, because that's one strong thing you got to worry about with your average deck building game is when you create a deck building game, it's hard to go super asymmetric without having a game that is too one-sided for one special player, or in this case, one special empire. So it's enough of a feel of a different empire to create a feeling of a different empire, so you feel like you're playing a little bit differently, but not feeling like you're being railroaded into a specific mechanic when it comes to playing this game. Now, like I said, the basic idea of the game is the player is going to be using their fledgling empire with their warships, their drop ships, or their drop units and everything like that to go out there and start conquering these different worlds. These different worlds are going to allow them to get victory points, allow them to get resources, because the players need to track all the resources as they're playing the game, because you only have a certain amount of energy to accomplish all the actions you want to do. Whether it's energy to launch your units, whether it's energy to attack different worlds, or energy to even gain control of these things, that's something you got to be very cognizant of as you're playing the game. And this game has a very evolving feel to the game as you're playing through the gameplay itself. Because you're going to start with the far out barbaric worlds, which are not as powerful, not as strong and rich in resources, but as you play through the game, you're going to start moving deeper and deeper into the Galactic Empire, moving closer and closer to the core worlds, which are much more powerful and worth a heck of a lot more victory points, while you're working with these different conglomerates such as the Mining Coalition, the Mechanical Alliance, the Galactic Senate, and all these different things. Using your influence by how you're purchasing these cards is going to affect the influence you have here as you're slowly building up your deck, building up your empire, and slowly evolving how you're going to play the game. Now, this game has also did another really cool thing, which is a mechanic that we've seen actually a lot of at this point, but when Core Worlds first came out, this is something that was actually fairly unique to the deck building game. It had the concept of deck deconstruction, whereas as you're buying cards and adding these cards into your empire, you can actually start getting rid of the weaker cards, making sure that the more powerful cards are the ones that come into your hand. Because like I said, this game has a very evolving feel to it. And that's another thing that's really important about the game of Core Worlds. This is also a game that's going to reward experience and lots of ability to play this game better, because as you get better at playing this game, you're going to be able to see how your strategies evolve. And it's also a game that shows that the more you apply your time at the game, learning the strategies and the tactics of the game, you're going to see the evolutionary gameplay, which is something I really appreciate, especially in a good deck building game. This is not a game that you can play once or twice and feel like a master of it. This is a game where you're going to feel yourself evolving the more and more you play this game. I like to make it, or kind of allude that it's very akin to a game such as Race for the Galaxy, where it's a game that you have to play multiple times just to get the basic concepts of the game, basic strategies, just how to work towards these basic core worlds, just to understand how to build up your empire, how to build up your different strategies, your different tactics, while trying to avoid things such as events that are going to be coming into the game as you're evolving, working through how your influence works with all these different conglomerates as you build up your empire and start enjoying this wonderful game. Now, this game does have a couple expansions, and I highly, highly recommend that you get the Galactic Orders game. I personally feel that the game is not complete, and I know it sounds like I'm being negative by saying this, but the Galactic Orders expansion is just that good. I almost feel like it's a mandatory purchase when it comes to the game. But the second expansion that comes with the game, which is the Revolution, adds even more to the gameplay and makes it feel like these individual small-fledged empires are much more unique and add an extra level of gameplay, which I highly recommend. Again, Galactic Orders, I'm going to say, is mandatory for the game, but the Revolution is just a fantastic add-on to what is a wonderful game. Now, if you're actually interested in Core Worlds, I'm going to just throw this out there right now. Andrew Parks actually has a Kickstarter going for his new worker placement game. And I know the Kickstarter is ending in a couple days, but I'm going to leave a link down below to it in the comments down below. Because if you go to the Kickstarter right now, you can actually get a hold of the complete game of Core Worlds with all the expansions for an extremely fantastic price. I can't emphasize how great this price is. If you have any interest in the game of Core Worlds, and why wouldn't you? If you like deck building games, this is an absolute fantastic deck building game with wonderful variety, wonderful replay, and it plays all the way up to 5 players. And that Kickstarter is also adding in an expansion, which is going to allow you to play the game of Core Worlds as a solo game. That's a wonderful thing. If you have any interest in Core Worlds, if you have any interest in deck building games, go check out that link I'll leave in the comments down below, because you're going to be really happy you checked out for a really fantastic game. That's the game of Core Worlds. Number 27, dropping down for number 26, is going to be the game of Hyperborea. Now, the game of Hyperborea is a game for 2 to 6 players, and this is a game that has a stupidly insane amount of replay, all in just one base box. But I'll go and explain to you how the game works first. The idea of Hyperborea, this is an empire strategy style building game where each player is going to take control of one of the empires, and your eventual objective is to complete one of these objectives. Depending on how many players you have and how long of a game you want to play, that's going to change the amount of victory conditions that you're going to need. But once a certain amount of victory conditions have been met, the game is going to come to an end. Players can add up the victory points. We're going to decide who's going to be the grand winner of the game. The interesting thing and the cool thing, or one of the many cool things about this game, is the fact of how you're going to play this game. This game is what we like to call a bag building game, and that's one of the first interesting things about the game. The idea is to take any actions, you're going to have a bag that's going to be full of a whole bunch of cubes, and you're going to gain more and more cubes by doing various different actions and increasing the amount of technology you have available to your empire. But the basic idea is you're going to have a certain amount of cubes at the start of every one of your turns. You're going to use these cubes to activate your actions, which will allow you to interact with the board, interact with the other players, and also interact with the tech tree, and also work towards gaining grand victory and winning the game. So on your turn, you're simply going to take your cubes and you're going to place them on various different locations, and as soon as you fill out one of these actions, you get to perform that action. Now, it's kind of an interesting ebb and flow of this game because you don't need to perform the action immediately when you move your cubes down there. You also gain action economy in this game also by exploring the board. So for example, I could at the start of my turn, having these 3 cubes, I say, hey, why don't I go ahead and buy a tech, because one of these 4 tech trees actually has a technology that looks really, really darn cool. So I just take my cubes out here, go out there and go ahead and purchase a technology. Or I can take the game and it's very organic and very evolving the way the play of the game goes. And I could do something like, okay, let me go ahead and move my unit in here, which is going to give me a point of movement, and it's also going to give me an advance on the tech tree, which could allow me to gain an extra cube. In this case, I can gain an extra purple cube, and every different color cubes has their own different ways that they interact with the board. Some cubes are more for war, some cubes are more for movement, some cubes are more for evolving technology. You get the basic idea. So I basically have a point of movement and an advancement on my tech tree. So now that I have a point of this movement, why don't I go ahead and move a unit over into this area right here? And since I'm in this area right here, why don't I go ahead and explore this ancient city right here? Now, exploring this ancient city, I can either make another draw from my bag to gain another cube, or gain a point of movement. Let's go ahead and take a point of movement, and then let's go ahead and move to this location right here. Now, different locations and different terrains on this board are going to affect the ability to do movement in this game. You have swamplands, you have mountains, you have forests, and all these different things have different penalties and bonuses to movement. So let's say I'm going to go ahead and move in here. Let's say I have the amount of movement that's going to allow me to move in here, and I'm going to decide that I'm going to explore this ruins. I'm going to explore this ruins, and hey, let's see this really cool thing. I actually found some more points of movement. I can save these, or I can spend them right here. Additionally, what I was not done yet, but something I need to do, as soon as you move adjacent to these tiles right here that have been explored, you are going to reveal the Fog of War. And when you reveal the Fog of War, it's going to give you some additional abilities to move around the board and different interactions. And when you open up these different areas, you're also going to add more of these tiles, these little tokens right here, onto these different locations. And these locations are going to be protected by the ancient enemies, the ancient ghosts of the past. And then you need to go in there and actually interact with the board. So with that extra movement, I could possibly, if I had the ability, again, I don't have enough movement here because this is a mountain range, but I could move into this mountain range, take out whatever ghost happens to be protecting this by spending a red cube for that and a yellow cube for a point of attack. Attack this ghost and then enter the city and go ahead and get some really cool rewards. Maybe we get some of the silver rewards. And that's part of the really, really cool thing about this game is the insane amount of variety just in the way this game is going to play every time you play this game. You have an awesome amount of replay just with the amount of actions that are available to your armies. You have a great amount of variety with the different tech trees that come with the game, but you also have a phenomenal amount of replay with this game just in the way of the fact that this game is going to play differently because you're going to set up the board differently every single time you play the game. Every time that you play the game, you're going to have one center tile out of 6 possible center tiles to choose from. Every single time you play this game, you're going to have 6 middle region tiles out of all of these tiles to choose from, meaning that this game is going to play differently every time you play the game. Plus, you have the different gold tokens, different bronze tokens, silver tokens, and the gold tokens. And as you move in, you're going to gain actually these much more powerful tokens, which are going to give you random rewards, adding into the amount of variety in the replay in this game. This game has a lot of deep strategy. I haven't even included the fact that every one of these factions in this game is extremely asymmetric. When you start the game, you can pick 1 of 3 racial powers, which is unique to your faction and your faction alone. Of course, if you want, you can play without racial powers and play the basic standard game where all the races in the game have the exact same abilities and there are no racial powers. Because these racial powers do require a little bit of skill to understand with this game because these racial powers are very, very powerful. Some of them can be very warlike, some of them can be very tech-based, some of them can be about manipulating the victory points, gaining tokens, or even burning victory points for extra special abilities. So all these different powers are extremely powerful and they can make a huge change for the game. And I haven't even included the fact that there are tons of technology in this game, more text than you ever use in a single game. There's different victory conditions for this game. There's even an expansion that adds in different things that are added, different modifications to the game. New cubes are going to be a temptation to use because they may give you bonuses, but each one of these cubes also comes with a penalty, making this an extremely awesome area control game that has a phenomenal amount of replay based on the way you're going to set up the board, based on the different races you're incorporating in the board, different racial powers, different layout, and exactly how this game is going to play every single time. That is the game of Hyperborea. Number 26 in a new list is the game of Wildlands, a game that's currently for 2 to 4 players, but pretty soon when the next expansion, the expansion for the Ancients comes out, this is going to be a 1 to 5 player game of Miniatures on a map competing through smart card play to gain a certain amount of victory points to win the game. The first person to get 5 victory points is going to be the winner of the game, making this a game that plays smartly and quickly, but it's also very smart and quick and interesting in the way you're going to set up the game and the way you're going to interact with the other players. At the start of the game, every single player is going to get a hand of 10 of these cards right here. And these cards right here are going to be various locations matching different locations on the board. Here's the trick of how the game is going to start when you first start playing the game. You're going to get 10 of these cards, and 5 of them you're going to pick, and you're going to place them underneath your heroes secretly without showing the other players, and that's where that hero is going to spawn. But again, the other players at the table have no idea where this hero is going to spawn. Once you pick your 5 of your 10 cards, you're going to take your remaining 5 cards and pass them to the player to your right. That player to your right is going to use those remaining 5 cards to place their 5 crystals on the board, and they're going to use those cards to seed those cards or those crystals on the board. Now here's the interesting interaction that comes in for this game. You gain a victory point every time you knock out an opposing player's unit. You also gain a victory point every time you find one of your crystals. So right at the start of the game, you already have this interesting game, this kind of this mind game, because I'm going to have my hand of 10 cards. I'm going to know where my units are, and I'm going to know where the player to my right is me placing all their crystals. So I can start baiting and setting traps, because right from the start of the game, I've got this interesting gameplay mechanic. Next up, the next level, the next really cool, interesting gameplay mechanic about this game is that you're going to have your hand of cards, and it's going to be a hand of 7 cards. Every single action you take is going to be based on this hand of cards. Whether it's activating your heroes, whether it's attacking other players, whether it's defending yourself from attacks from other players, or whether it's just moving out there to go ahead and collect these crystals that you need to gain your victory points, it's all going to be through clever card play. Taking it one step further, adding in one level more of really cool card mechanic is the fact in this game that you can interrupt other players' turns. And that is something that's extremely unique to this style of game. And actually, let's be honest, it's actually unique to the board game and hobby, being able to interrupt another player's turn. So if on your turn you simply take one of your cards, play it down, take an action with one of your heroes, before you take another action at the table, any other player at the table can play an interrupt card. If they play an interrupt card, they can start playing cards and taking actions until they either decide to stop taking actions or another player at the table plays an interrupt card. And you can keep on going with this dynamic action of going these interrupts, interacting with the other players, and then finally when we're all done with all the interrupts, we're going to go back to the active player's turn. Although with interrupt play, the active player may still be having turns because the active player can also play their own interrupt cards. Now there's not a lot of interrupt cards in this deck, but that adds one more level to the mechanics of the game. A game that on its surface seems pretty darn simple. It's a very simple game of moving your units across the board, attacking other players, and hoping to gain your crystals. But this card play, this interesting mechanics, and the fact that you have multiple different maps, you have this map which is double-sided, you have multiple other maps that you can purchase that add to the replay and the variety of the game. Some maps which actually come in 2 pieces representing 2 levels of a mansion. Certain maps are going to be better for lower player counts. Certain maps are better for higher player counts. And let's not also, we can't neglect to forget to include the fact there's actually multiple different factions. I guess that's the best term I can use right now is factions. I know in the board gaming hobby there's a better term for it, but me as a Games Workshop style player and that miniatures gamer, I'm going to call it factions. But every single player can pick a different faction, and all these different factions play differently and add to the variety of the game. Some of these factions are more about movement, some of these factions are more about attacking, some of these factions are more about ranged attacks, and all these different factions have their own different abilities, because every single faction has their own unique deck of cards, which has this unique layout of how their actions will be dispersed, what kind of actions they have access to, and there's this nice overview that gives you a rough idea of just exactly how your faction plays. This faction has this breakout of these kind of cards right here, whereas opposed to this faction has this different breakout of these kind of cards right here. So you see that this faction has 10 of these kind of cards, this faction has 13 of these kind of cards, this faction only has 11 of these kind of cards, this faction has 15 of these kind of cards. So you see that there's already interesting dynamics and interesting gameplay among all these heroes who have their own unique stats, their own unique card play, and their own unique interaction between all the different interactions in this game. Again, this game is going to play phenomenally amount of replay because you have different factions, different boards, and eventually pretty darn soon with that nice expansion you're going to have the ability to play this game as a 1-player all the way up to 5-player. And I do believe you can actually play that version with a co-op. I don't have the expansion because it's not available yet, but it's one I'm definitely looking highly forward to. That's going to be the expansion for Wildlands on my list. Number 25 on the list is going to be Warhammer Underworlds. This is a miniature style game that competed with the place of number 26, which is Wildlands. So darn close. Matter of fact, these two games, number 25, Warhammer Underworlds and number 26 Wildlands are so extremely close to each other, it's quite conceivable these games may flip-flop in future videos like this, because each one of these videos takes the basic idea of a miniature skirmish style game and does their mechanics so darn differently with different approaches to the exact same idea of a game that it's very, very possible that just depending on my current playgroup, my current playstyle, or what my current whims happen to be, I could see one of these games kind of flip-flopping back and forth just because these games are so darn awesome with completely opposite approaches to the same idea of the game. So this is a miniature style game where each single player is going to control a faction. Your idea with this game is to make it through 3 rounds trying to gain the most amount of victory points. Now the way you're getting victory points in this game is by completing objectives. You may get objectives that may require just to do some kind of movement. Some of your objectives may be required to keep your half of the board secured and away from your opponent, or maybe you may have a grand victory condition which just requires you to annihilate your opponent. Here's the really cool thing about this game. This game takes a miniature skirmish game, a very tight, very concise miniature skirmish game, where the economy of movement is extremely tight and very, very locked together to the point that this game can be very challenging just to play very well because the economy of actions is so darn tight. But this takes the basic idea of a very tight miniature skirmish game and mixes it with a deck building game, because before you even belly up to the table to play this game with your opponent across from you, you're going to build your deck of cards by building your power cards, which are all the cards you're going to use to play various different actions with your band of heroes. And I use the term heroes very loosely because this is Warhammer and heroes is definitely not the right word to use here. But you're going to build your deck of power cards and you're going to build your deck of objectives before you come up to the table. And this is a very tight, concise game where you need to build your decks precisely for your heroes, because there are certain warbands can only use certain goals, certain powers, and certain abilities. And your whole objective is to complete as many objectives, to score as many victory points to defeat your opponent before the end of the 3rd round. And these rounds are very, very quick because you only get so many actions every single round. And once you've used your actions, we're going to go to the next round and the next round, and then we're going to figure out who the winner of the game is. So the interesting thing about this game is the way the combat plays out, the way the deck building works out, and the fact that you can evolve your heroes to various different actions, which will allow your heroes to level up to gain more powers, more abilities, and maybe more hit points, more attack, and everything like that. But the thing that this game does differently from number 26, which is purely about the card-based combat, this is a game that's about rolling dice, because you're going to roll dice for your different actions, whether it happens to be spell dice, whether it happens to be attack dice, or whether it happens to be defense dice. And you're going to use these to interact with all the players, again, using this deck of cards that you bring to the table before the game even starts. This game has a phenomenal amount of replay variety and a phenomenal amount of strategy and a phenomenal amount of depth. There are multiple different factions available for this game right now. I think we're approaching 15 or maybe more factions are available for this game. Every one of these factions comes with their own set of cards that are unique to their faction, but there's also universal cards that be used with any faction. And these are universal quest cards, these are universal power cards. So you can build your deck and your faction to their own strengths, to their own weaknesses, creating different tactics every time you play this game. Sometimes you can come to the table with your ghost faction with the whole idea of trying to obliterate your opponent. Sometimes you can come to the table with the whole idea of just trying to gain control of certain locations, holding on those locations to gain victory points, or sometimes it could be a denial tactic or a good strategy, because again, there are tons and tons and tons of these cards offering way more different ways that you can play the game, different strategies, and you're going to build the strength of your faction around these objectives and your power cards to create a faction that's going to decimate your opponents. Now this game does have a lot of replay variety built into it, just the way you can build up your factions, but there's a lot of replay because there's multiple different boards which have different obstacles, different objectives, and you can build your obstacles out differently every time you play the game. You can play this game solo versus a giant enemy AI that you're trying to defeat by playing this game out. And it can be played different ways and add different strategies and different tactics just by playing this game. Again, it's still a very tight game to play as a solo game, but you can also play this game up to 4 players, adding more variety, adding in more boards, because the board itself is going to grow. And this is a game that you see that just has a phenomenal amount of replay and a phenomenal amount of variety. Now, like I said, this game is currently number 25 on my list. It just barely eked out Wildlands at number 26. But I can honestly say that 26 and 25 are 2 games that are going to fight for each other just based on the current whims, and it can actually matter for you out there in the audience watching this right now. If you want a game where you're going to build up your faction and your faction is going to play differently every single time you play it, and you like the meta game that occurs before you even get to the table, Warhammer Underworlds. If you want a game that is more about the strategy of learning the strengths of your factions, getting into the minds of the other players, and you like the interrupt mechanic, but you don't like the randomness of the dice and the chaos the dice create, Wildlands is definitely going to be the better game for you. Either way, these are two fantastic games, two great games, and two games that definitely belong in my top 51 games of all time. That's Warhammer Underworlds number 25. Number 24, and jumping up from number 34, is going to be Thunderstone Quest. Now, Thunderstone has actually gone through multiple iterations, and this is kind of technically basically the third edition of the game. You have the original Thunderstone, then you have Thunderstone Advanced, now we have Thunderstone Quest, which has actually evolved the game quite a bit over the years, modifying certain rules of the game, but keeping the basic core of the game itself throughout all these years. The basic idea of the game is every single player is going to start with their own deck of cards, and this is going to be your basic hand of cards. You're going to use those basic hand of cards, and you're going to either visit the village, or you're going to go out there and visit the dungeon, using your cards to either defeat monsters in the dungeon, or you're going to use your cards in the city, going to various different locations, buy things such as new spells, new items, maybe getting some treasures, or updating your deck of cards to become more powerful, or even to hire adventurers to be part of your party. Because thematically, the player themselves represents a mage or a wizard who's going into a dungeon. And you can hire a cleric to go along with you, you can hire a fighter to go along with you, you can hire a rogue or even another wizard to go along with you to go deep delving into this dungeon, defeating all these different monsters with the eventual objective to find these keys. Now, these keys are what makes the interesting mechanic for the game. Because every time you play this game, you're going to shuffle a random amount, or not a random, a specific amount of these keys into these decks randomly, and when these keys start getting revealed, they're going to slowly start unlocking the dungeon, which allows you to take out the big grand baddie. Once the big grand baddie has been woken up and unlocked, then the players get one final round to go ahead and take out the big bad baddie. Whoever does this the most efficiently by deck building, by deck construction, and by exploring the dungeon is going to be the grand winner of the game. Now, this game adds a lot of cool mechanics, and it adds a lot of really cool theme to it by evolving the basic deck building game. But one of the things that I appreciate so much about this game is just the fact that this game actually feels like you're playing kind of like a story-based deck building game, because every time you play the game, you are going to pick a specific quest, and that's the quest you're going to go on as the players for this game. And the quests kind of have a nice theme to them, but the cool things about these quests is, along with a storyline, they're going to tell you what heroes are going to be available, what items will be available, what magic spells are available, and they're going to tell you how to build up the board and how to build up the dungeon with the different locations every single time you play the game. Once you beat a certain quest, you can go ahead and move on to the next quest, which is going to add in different monsters, different bad guys, and different final enemies, adding to the amount of fun and amount of replay that comes in this game. So you have what you could call a basic deck building game that advances it by having multiple different locations to visit, a really cool theme and a really cool storyline, and a phenomenal amount of replay that comes in this game. Because every time you play the game, you're going to have a different dungeon that you're going to build. And there are so many different dungeon locations, so many different heroes, so many different bad guys, so many different items, so many different treasures, creating this wonderful game that has a phenomenal amount of replay. And it's actually a really well designed game. This game adds it in so many different ways to play it, ensuring that you're never going to get bored. There's ways that you can play this game just by following the standard quest books. You can play Epic Thunderstone if you want, which takes the different ideas of the game and modifies it a little bit, makes it feel less like a quest game and more like a fantasy-based deck building game. But there's so many different ways to play this game, to enjoy this game, to have this wonderful enjoyment with this game of Thunderstone Quest. Number 23, and jumping up from 41, is going to be Evolution Climate, an extremely well designed, extremely playable, and a fantastic game that is just beautifully artistically designed, beautifully artistically simple to teach, beautifully artistically easy to play, but so darn deeply strategic. It's one of those games that you play multiple times over and over and over again. Every single time you play it, it's going to be a different strategy, different tactics, different gameplay, and it's a game that just has so much phenomenal replay potential. Matter of fact, this is one of those very, very few games. I am very much not an app gamer. When it comes to playing board games, I want to play a board game. But this is one of the very few games that I enjoy so much that I actually enjoy playing the app, just so I get the chance to keep playing this game when I can't be playing it with my friends. So what's the basic idea of the game of Evolution? The game of Evolution is a game where the players are going to be building various different dinosaurs, and your dinosaurs are going to be represented by these little boards right here. You're going to have one token that's going to represent the population of your dinosaur, and then you have one that's going to represent the body size of your dinosaur. Well, why is that important? Because you're going to be playing this with up to 2 to 6 players, and the way you're going to be evolving your dinosaur is going to be dependent on cards you're going to play on your dinosaur, which is going to give you various different traits and different abilities. Whether those traits are defensive traits, allows it to climb to avoid predators, or they're cards that allow you to become the predator yourself to start attacking other players because you're now a carnivore and you're all competing for resources. And these resources are what you're fighting for, because when there's not enough resources, your body and your population is going to start dying off. And as the population starts dying off, the players are going to be losing access to their dinosaurs, losing victory points, and losing the game versus their opponents. So the basic idea of the game is every single round the players are going to get the chance to evolve their dinosaurs, give them different traits while you're fighting for these, competing for these resources. If you're able to get these resources and feed your dinosaurs, at the end of every single round, all the food resources you've been able to gather, you're going to put them in your bag, and at the end of the game, whoever has the most food resources is going to get the most victory points. They're going to win the game. The interesting thing about this game is the fact that as you build your carnivores or omnivores or herbivores, they can interact with the other players. And some of them, such as the carnivores, are mandatory interaction, which can almost become a double-edged sword, because carnivores will only eat meat, which means they will not eat from the central pile right here. And there's no game for them to pick on from the other players. You guess it, they may end up eating your own dinosaurs, which is one of the strategic tactics you can play this game. There is so much phenomenal replay potential in this game based on the different way you're going to build your dinosaurs every time you play this game, the way the climate's going to start changing, affecting different things and the amount of food resources that are available, the way you're going to interact with the other players, and this game just plays so phenomenally well. One of the amazing things about this game is how much gameplay you get out of this game in a very, very quick gaming package. This game is very quickly approaching Race for the Galaxy and one of my top 51 games of all time, because this game does so many things that are fantastic in a card game that I enjoy from Race for the Galaxy, while giving me a completely different theme. Evolution Climate is a phenomenal game. Now, I haven't had a chance to play the Marine Edition, but if you have a choice between Evolution Climate and the basic Evolution, I think Evolution Climate is a phenomenal game. Phenomenal artwork, fantastic replay potential. It's just a great game all the way around. That's Evolution Climate. Number 22 on the new list is going to be Dungeon Alliance. Now, this is a deck building, adventure, dungeon exploring game for 1 to 4 players, and it does allow you to play this game as a solo game. You can play this game as a cooperative game. You can play this game as a competitive game. You can play this game as a quest game. You can play this game as an adventure game. You can play this game as a quest style game where you're going out there after so many quests. This is a game that just has so much in one box. It's amazing to describe just the amount of replay that you can get in one box of this game, or 2 boxes when you get the expansions, but you get my idea here. The basic idea of the game of Dungeon Alliance is every single player, whether you're playing the game cooperatively or competitively, is every single player is going to form a Dungeon Alliance of 4 heroes. And at the start of the game, you're going to draft out your heroes based on the amount of heroes that are available for all the players, and you're going to draft your adventuring party to start this adventure in. Your heroes come with their own special cards which are unique to those specific heroes. Every single hero comes with special 3 cards that are unique to that exact hero. So that's going to modify the way you're going to play the game just before you even start playing the game, because your alliance is unique and is going to play differently against the next player's alliance, the next player's alliance, the next player's alliance. Doesn't matter if you're playing cooperatively or competitively, the way you're going to start playing the game is unique right when you start playing the game. The basic idea of the game is the players are going to be exploring a dungeon, encountering monsters, encountering traps, encountering various different things, and your basic objective is to go ahead and gain experience points. The experience points in this game are your victory points. At the end of the game, all your experience points that you manage to accumulate are going to give you the amount of victory points you're going to get, and whoever has the most amount of victory points is going to be the winner. Again, that's playing competitively. If you're playing cooperatively versus quest, you need to complete a certain amount of quests. Well, you get the idea. If you want to learn, check out my full video series on Dungeon Alliance. I go into much more about the game in that video series. But the interesting thing about this game is your experience points you're getting that are victory points. You can also use these experience points to buy more cards. And these cards are going to increase the power of your alliance. But here's the first of 2 tricks that are really, really cool about this. Every single Dungeon Alliance is made up of heroes who are unique races and unique classes, where they have to be more of a priest-style healer, more of a hybrid such as a fighter rogue, or more of an orc, more of a dwarf, more of a gnome, more of a human. But the amount of cards and the abilities of all these cards are very unique to special races. For example, only an elf character can use this spell right here, or this ability right here. Only a healer class can use this ability right here. This one is unique to knights and stuff like that. This one happens to be usable by knights and also celestial. So all these different cards that you're going to use to evolve your deck are unique to every one of the players. So again, helping add to the uniqueness and the variety and the gameplay you get every time you play this game. Also increasing the strategies, because you want to build a Dungeon Alliance that is very cohesive but not too focused. Because if you have a Dungeon Alliance that's way too focused, say they're very good at casting spells, you're going to lose out a whole bunch of cards and upgrades that are available to you if those cards and upgrades don't come into the game. So you have this game that evolves extremely well by creating this dungeon delving adventure that plays anywhere from 1 to 4 players, plays cooperatively, competitively. You can play with PvP, player versus player on. You can turn off PvP if that's not something that you're comfortable with or something you don't enjoy when you play these games. And this game just creates this very interesting narrative, especially when you start throwing in these adventure decks, which are going to create this evolving narrative where things are going to happen and you actually get choices when you play these adventures, which is why I'm going to go and hit this point right here, because I'm sure some of you have already noticed this. A lot of you may have noticed that Mage Knight has dropped down in my top 51 of all games of all time. Dungeon Alliance is the reason why that's happened, because Dungeon Alliance for me has replaced a lot of things in the game of Mage Knight. It has taken the game of Mage Knight and evolved it by adding in some more things, some more variety, and some very interesting story-based challenges and some very interesting, very cool gameplay that I enjoy with the amount of variety you get with the different alliances, the way these adventure monsters are going to come out, the different ways you can play this game, so much variety, different adventures, different gameplay, so much variety in one box. That's the game of Dungeon Alliance. Number 21, and dropping from number 20 ever so slightly, is going to be Three Kingdoms. The absolute best 3-player game that has ever been designed. I'm serious. You can do like the mic drop thing and just go mic drop and walk away and say, best 3-player game. We're done. Don't need to say more. But we do need to say more, because that'd be a really terrible video if I started doing that kind of stuff. But the basic idea of Three Kingdoms is this game takes the classic mechanics of classic PC games from the 80s, such as Romance of the Three Kingdoms or games along those lines from Koei and other publishers like that, Nobunaga's Ambition, and I'm trying to remember there's a third one, but I'm drawing a blank on it right now. But it takes the mechanics of those games and brings it down into a board game. And this is designed after a classic period of history where you had 3 different, or actually more than 3, but you had multiple warring states who were trying to take control and gain dominance. And this game has taken those mechanics, brought it down into a board game, and has done it so absolutely fantastically, while keeping the theme, while keeping the drama, keeping the gameplay, and creating this wonderful game that plays so absolutely fantastically. So the basic idea of Three Kingdoms is every single player is going to be playing, taking control of one of these provinces, or these, provinces isn't the right term. I think the better term for it would be a dynasty. That's probably going to be the better term, and make a lot less people watch this video go, oh my god, I can't believe you're saying the wrong word again. Remember people, I'm horrible at language. That's one of the worst things I'm good at. Watch how I try to pronounce names in the Firefly video. You want to get some really good comedy? Go check it out. Anyways, the basic idea of this game is every single player is going to take control of one of these dynasties. You have the Wei, the Wu, and the Shu dynasty. And starting right here and right now, we already have the classic theme of this dynasty period. Because in this game, the Wei player starts off more powerful than the Wu and the Shu player, starting with more generals and starting off with more dominance in the game. So it's up to the other 2 players to band together, to work together to take down the Wei player. And this game continues to evolve that mechanic, working out the biggest problem with any 3-player game, which is the king making mechanic. And instead of trying to ignore king making, this game in a way embraces it, but in a very smart design, which allows the other players to purposefully and intentionally work together to bring down the player who happens to be in the lead, creating this game that evolves organically as you play this game, creating this phenomenal game representing a period piece, and doing that period piece extreme amounts of justice, and a phenomenally great game. Now the basic idea of this game is every single player on their turn is they're going to take one of their generals and they're going to move one of their generals to one of these locations to gain the ability to use this specific location and to gain resources. We've done all this before with our basic worker placement games. One of the unique mechanics about this game, and one of the things that I enjoy, and once I experience this, I started learning this as something I want in every one of my worker placement games, is the fact that you don't necessarily control location just because you're first to go there. You have to be first to go there, but also have the strength to hold on to that location, because somebody can take that location from you, bump that location away for you, and gain the benefits of that location. And that's something I really enjoy in a worker placement game. On top of that, you're building this game where you have a game which is all about dominance, all about war, all about working together competitively and cooperatively to try to bring down the other players, creating this wonderful theme that matches the mechanics and the theme of this period in history to create this wonderful, wonderful board game. Now, I think Three Kingdoms is probably the absolute best 3-player game that's ever been designed. It's a phenomenal game as a 3-player game. It's also, just ignoring the fact that it's a 3-player game, it's actually just a wonderful design itself. You have the different paths to victory. You have different mechanics for this game. You have an ebb and a flow to this game. You have different kind of cards which are going to change things up. You have way more cards that you'll ever use in a single game, making sure that every time you play this game, you're going to have extra variety. There's multiple generals, multiple different ways, multiple different tactics, multiple different paths to explore towards victory, creating this wonderful game. That's going to be Three Kingdoms, number 21, the absolute best three-player game I have ever played. Now that's going to bring to a close this episode of the Top 51 Games of All Time, covering numbers 30 all the way down to number 21. Stay tuned for the next two videos in the series, covering number 20 all the way down to number 11, and number 10 all the way down to number 1. If you have any comments, questions, make sure you leave them down in the YouTube comments down below. I will definitely get to them as quick as I can. You can also feel free to email me at offtheshelfboardgamereviews. That's otsbgr@gmail.com. Be sure to answer emails as quickly as I can. If you enjoyed this video and you enjoyed this content on the channel, think about supporting the channel over on Patreon. Just $1 single in the tip jar can help me cover my costs and help keep the lights on. That's patreon.com/otsbgr. If you enjoyed this video, if you enjoyed this video series, click that like button, click that subscribe button, and as always, thanks for watching.